Hello. I wanted to talk today about some community interactions that we see in ecosystems. And we should start by remembering what a community is. We're talking about different species interacting in the same environment. So this could be a herd of buffalo, like we've talked about, and possibly the lions that are chasing them around. So before we get too far, I want to talk about something called a niche. You've probably heard about a niche before. Some people define a niche as a way of life. It's not necessarily an organism's habitat, but it's best described as a range of physical and biological conditions in which a species lives, and the key here is that it's able to reproduce. So a niche for an organism is defined by something called tolerance. And if we look at this graph right here, there's a population on the y-axis and some sort of environmental variable on the x-axis. So one of the most common environmental variables that might define a species niche could be something like temperature. And so there's going to be some low temperature that the organism can't survive in, and also some high temperature that an organism might also die if they experience that high temperature. So in this optimum range, the organism is going to do well, the population is going to increase. And then if we get out of that optimal range, you can see the population dropping off. And so we have an upper and a lower limit for the tolerance that the individual can experience. And really, this chart describes the niche of that species. Where and when are they successful in the environment? So it's not just where they live, which is the habitat, but it's also this range of physical and biological conditions. And so, you know, we could have a biological variable here, like, maybe they need another organism to survive, that they have some sort of symbiosis happening, that sort of thing. And so think about right now an environmental variable that might affect a tolerance for a species, and try to steer clear of temperature. So brainstorm a little bit. So habitat, as I said, is just kind of the place where an organism lives. One thing I want to say about habitat with organisms in the environment is biologists have found that the single most effective management strategy to increase or maintain healthy animal populations is to focus on increasing and improving habitat. And so they've spent a lot of money, doing things like creating wildlife management areas and focusing on improving stream systems and all sorts of things to improve the habitat of the environment. And it's made a big difference. Animal populations in Montana are doing really well. In some places almost too well, where there's so many organisms that, it's presenting problems for landowners or things like that. Or another example would be the grizzly bear populations, or the grizzlies have recovered so well that they've expanded their range and they're seeking out new habitat because of the competition with other grizzlies. So do you think reduction of habitat might affect the population? Well, I pretty much answered that one, didn't I? But you should try to answer it as well. So besides predator-prey, that's a really common community interaction. What are some other ones that maybe we don't know as much about? Um, so think about that for a second. So one of the most important types of community interactions are competition between different species. And there's been some famous experiments done to establish that no two species can occupy the same niche. And that's illustrated by this graphic over here titled the competitive exclusion principle. So what it says is that basically if I have two organisms that have kind of the same niche, they're both not going to be able to operate there. And you can probably think about some real world or even like in your life, some examples of what that might look like. Um, but in this graphic, we have a couple parameciums that are placed in the same conditions together. And basically, we're trying to encourage some competition and see who is going to survive. And ultimately, what happens is the two living separately, they do okay. And when they live together, what happens is one of the organisms is going to go extinct. But there is a solution to this in nature is that if two organisms have a very similar niche, what that usually leads to is some sort of migration in search for different habitat. So competition for limited resources is a huge community interaction. Herbivory is basically the grazers version of predator prey. So grazers affect size and distribution of plant populations. Isn't something that you normally think of, but a lot of times grazers can spread seeds. They can reduce specific species that maybe they're really keyed in on that taste good to them. They can spread weeds. There's all sorts of things that grazers or herbivores can do in grassland communities to change the species composition. Something that we'll really get into in this ecology investigation that we're doing is the idea of a keystone species. So this is a species in an environment where the population of this specific species has a disproportionate impact on the other species in the environment. For example, the wolf is a classic keystone species in Yellowstone, where the removal of that wolf caused a whole lot of things to happen in Yellowstone. And then upon reintroduction, we saw those changes be reversed. And one of the classic examples, which I'll probably show you a video of, is how biologists were noticing high rates of sedimentation in the streams. They're like wondering what's causing the decrease in water quality. Well, they figured out that the stream banks there was more erosion happening because there was less vegetation holding the streams um, together, so to speak. Vegetation and roots can kind of secure the bank. And so when that vegetation was removed, basically because there was too many elk in Yellowstone, it caused the stream, the water quality to be degraded. So ultimately, what had happened was that the removal of the wolf had led to an explosion of the elk population in Yellowstone to the point where they were overgrazing the landscape, they were destroying streamside vegetation, they were really reducing the aspen populations in the park. And all of that was because of the removal of a keystone species, which is this predator, which keeps the elk populations in check under a kind of natural ecosystem. So when we took wolves out of Yellowstone through trapping and hunting and ultimately eliminated them, we saw all these things happen that we had no idea would happen. And when we reintroduced that keystone species, it brought the environment back into balance. So the wolves are really an important part of the environment for that specific area. There's other keystone species in aquatic environments, lots of different kinds. I'll probably have you guys investigate a couple other ones. Um, so continuing down on my PowerPoint. Oh, we've reached the last slide. All right. Well, good job. Hopefully, if you have any questions, you've written those down and we should talk about it in class. All right, see ya.